Welcome back to Scale Your Code. I'm your host, Christoph Limplayer, and today I have the pleasure of announcing a new co-host to the show, Anthony James. That's right, big announcement. Anthony is going to join the show as a co-host, and this episode is all about him. That way you get to know who he is, some of his accomplishments, and also why we're adding a co-host to the show. So Anthony, thank you so much for being here today, and also thanks for joining the show as a co-host.
I'm really excited to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Also, thanks a lot for letting us film in your home. You really have a beautiful home here. Now, I'm going to ask you personal questions because I want the audience to get to know you and also to see why you're such a great fit for this role. But before we do that, I want to explain a couple of points and reasons why we decided to add a co-host to the show here. So reason number one, we've actually recently integrated Scale Your Code into Linux Academy and Cloud Assessments, and we have really big plans for that. So having Anthony on the show as a co-host is going to help expedite this because he's the CEO and founder of Linux Academy and Cloud Assessments. The reason number two is because Anthony has very deep technical knowledge in specific areas that I may not have knowledge in. That way he can ask specific questions that I may not have thought of. And so that's going to provide a lot more value to the listeners of the show. So with that being said, let's jump back over to you, Anthony, and tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background in IT and business.
So I'm founder and CEO of linuxacademy.com and cloudassessments.com, and really all started about 17 years ago when I got my first job working support and doing web hosting system administration at an internet service provider. Now, not just any internet service provider, a dial-up internet service provider that also provided web hosting. It's actually some of where I got my first business lessons, believe it or not.
So the funny thing is you actually studied business in school, but then you got IT jobs and you were doing IT things before then. So how did that work? What happened there?
Back when I was 16, I also started a PHP and Linux how-to website. It's actually, you can see it in the Wayback Machine, called pinehead.com. The same time I was working at the internet service provider. And the funny thing was at the time, I wrote a lot of code in PHP. I did a lot of those things, and I just thought engineering inside or computer science inside of the university may not be for me. There's a lot of math associated with it. I didn't really enjoy math at the time. So instead, I decided to go major in finance and economics, only to go down a path which arguably has a lot more math. Turns out economics is really geared towards statistics and calculations and all this other stuff where you have a lot of math associated with it. So really, I'm just kind of excited that I was able to go through both, got a lot of experience from the computer side of it, always did that through college, continued working at the internet service provider for a long time. And then I got the experience for economics and business, which I think is invaluable.
All right, now between the time of you working at the ISP and then starting Linux Academy, can you kind of backtrack and tell us what you did during that time? And then when did you start Linux Academy?
So after college, I went and I started working inside of doing something called fund accounting. Now, I don't know how much you are aware of accounting. There's not a lot of creativity. And in fact, the more creative you get with accounting, the more arguably in trouble you're going to get. So there's not a lot of creativity allowed for that. And so I was really ready to close the gap. I was missing, I was really missing kind of that IT component. So I took my IT background and I started working for a company as a business intelligence analyst. And I was building financial dashboards using a technology called ClickView and a lot of SQL querying in order to build intelligence around their financials and their decisions and their projections and stuff like that. And then from there, I went to go work at a church developing streaming architectures using AWS. And so it was actually the second church in the United States that had an online campus, and I was responsible for developing kind of that back end and even the front end of that online campus. And then from there, it's actually when I started Linux Academy, I was really excited about working with those technologies. This is when I was first introduced in AWS. This was in 2010, and I was super excited about it. I just wanted to keep doing more with it, and that's when I founded Linux Academy while working at the church. And so I actually did that part-time, and then went from there to go work as a senior systems engineer at a media company that hosted a whole bunch of websites that really our architecture received about 70 million visitors per month that we were responsible for.
When did you actually realize that Linux Academy was going to be a thing and you decided to go full-time, put all your efforts into it?
Well, it's funny. This is my wife's favorite thing because quite honestly, the goals around Linux Academy was never for it to be a huge company, right? Really, the reason I started it is multifaceted. One, I was really interested in certifications. Two, I was really interested in cloud technologies and I wanted to be able to continue using those and build on those. And then three, I genuinely just love helping people. And so when you combine those things together, you get Linux Academy. And really the only intention behind it was to have enough customers to fund being able to do it. I just wanted to do it. And one of the first business lessons I ever learned was actually from the internet service provider, is that if you're not growing, you're shrinking. And so the only thing I kept on is that we must always be doing something. And so we always worked with the customers. What do you want next? And then it just kept going. And then we just got to a point, a year and a half into it, where I was working 80 hours a week between the two jobs. And so I just went to my wife, who is a physical therapist, and I said, hey, can I go full time on this? She said yes. So super supportive. I got to give her props and a shout out for that. And then I went, instead of working 80 hours a week between two jobs, I worked 80 hours a week on Linux Academy. And anytime you focus more on something, the better it becomes. So it got all of my attention. And at that point, once it got all of my attention, it continued growing a little bit more. Well, I wasn't really expecting for it to get bigger, but what I did know is I was unable to support all of the customers by myself. So I ended up hiring somebody, our first hire, Stephen Smith, who's our Chief Content Officer. And then from there, we needed a little bit more help on development. So we hired Richard Layton, our first software developer. And then from there, we just kept going. When we needed a little bit more, we added a little bit more because we wanted to make sure that we were able to really assist and provide a good value for our customers for the price they were receiving.
Now, how did you figure out the technical components? Because I know you launched Linux Academy with something called cloud servers, where you can SSH into different distributions, play around with those distributions, and also play around with different tools like Puppet, Chef, and others. How did you know how to create that? Because that was one of the first of its kind. I don't think there's anything like it in the market. Did you use your previous IT experience, or what was that like?
Well, so that's funny. What I really enjoy about the certifications and the software development around it is it increases your baseline level of knowledge, right? And if you think about what an idea is just two things combined into one. And actually, that's a quote from somebody. I want to give them a shout out. I don't remember the name, but they did do the book called The Idea Book. It's a great book, and I want to make sure that I give credit where it's due. But when I look at that, that's the only thing that happened. Like, I liked AWS. I needed a way to, because the thing is, I learn slowly, believe it or not. And when I learn, I need to listen, I need to practice, I need to memorize, and I need to do it over and over again. And so I just looked at that. How can I provide value? How can we do this using the tools I already know? How can we combine those two things together? And then bam, Cloud Servers was born.
Now, you actually grew the company from 7 people in January of 2016 to now about 80 people in December of 2017, which is really fast growth in such a short period of time. What were some of the challenges and what spurred that growth?
Oh, I don't know if I can even remember everything that's happened. So, the first thing I will say is that seems like fantastic growth, but that's not without its own problems, right? Scaling companies, quite frankly, is a little bit different than scaling architectures. And you kind of have to change your thought process on how it operates. But what kind of spurred that growth was two things. We took a round of venture capital Series A, and we did that because we genuinely wanted to expand our offerings. Our students that were there kept saying, we want more, we want more. We love Linux Academy. We want you guys to teach these technologies. We don't want to go somewhere else. And when we looked at that, it was going to be a little bit more challenging to have money in the bank to weather any type of downtime, but also continue investment and growing. So we took a little bit of venture capital and we focused on building out that additional value for our students. So it was actually centered around being able to expand and offer that type of service based off what our students were asking for. And so the growth on there, we just, a lot of it is trial and error, honestly. And, we went from, like you said, 7 in January of 2016 to 80 today, which was pretty amazing. And I just have to give a shout out to the team because, quite frankly, the agility required to go through that type of growth. I mean, there's been a lot of changes. There've been reorg structures. There've been challenges. There's been good times. There's been bad times. And the staff and the team that has been able to do that for the benefit of the student, it's super agility. And I would just, big shout out to them. They've done an amazing job.
As the company has grown so much, how did you go from having your hands in everything to delegating almost everything and giving ownership to the rest of the team?
Yeah, so very hardly. I don't know if you've picked up on this. I don't know if I even said that correctly, but I like doing. I just do. And the problem is when you start scaling as a company and you have a CEO who likes doing and being involved in everything, you start becoming a bottleneck. And honestly, I wish I could say I learned the lesson a little bit sooner than later because, we probably would have avoided some challenges. And so, my current mindset is this. I have a lot of information, a lot of knowledge about Linux Academy in and of itself. I have a lot of knowledge around different technologies through all the certifications because I've created a lot of content. So I have 10 different certifications at this time. And I look at it, how can you scale yourself a little bit, right? So when you're looking at building companies, you want to put processes of empowerment. Number one, I want the company to be able to operate for the benefit of the student without me. And then I just want to be able to go in and provide value around areas that I can. And if I'm not able to provide value there, or if I'm not around for some reason, they're still able to move forward for the benefit of our customer with our regular mission of providing high quality and affordable hands-on training.
Also, your role as CEO of the company has changed, going from a handful of employees to now 80. How has it changed, and what are some tips that you've learned along the way that you could share with first-time CEOs?
Absolutely. So when you think about it, when you have 7 people on staff, almost every single day you're communicating with each other. Everybody knows exactly what's going on at all times. When you have 15 people on staff, still, the communication, there's a lot of it there. You don't have to worry about different processes of communication and empowerment because everybody's on the same page. Well, what happens is as you get to a point of around 50 people, it becomes a little bit different. And your role really does have to change from CEO, from being in the day-to-day stuff to even around the culture. It's my job to take care of our team so they can take care of our customers. And so around 50 people, you really kind of have to start looking at processes and teams and different type of structure that allows your teams to move forward and communicate versus just assuming. I think the biggest thing I want to encourage everybody is don't assume everybody just knows anymore at that size. You really have to think differently, and you have to be able to look at the organization and see it differently than you did when it was smaller. And quite honestly, it becomes different. It becomes, my day-to-day is completely different than it was when there was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of us. And it's gonna be different when there's more of us as well. And that's okay. I just have to learn to, or whoever's doing it has to learn to adapt and also, find that one thing that ignites your passion. Because a lot of times, you see CEOs or founders don't make the transition into large-scale CEOs because they're focused on what they loved, which was building that technology. And what I would say is building that technology, helping that customer, you can still do that. It's just different how you do it. You are assisting others in being able to do it versus actually writing the code hands-on yourself, which you still can, by the way.
I know one of the major struggles of first-time technical founders is that they have to give up some of that technical responsibility as CEOs or CTOs. How did you handle that struggle? How did you go from having your hands in the technical features to backing off and focusing more on the business aspects?
Well, I love that question. So I have a new philosophy, and I said it just a minute ago, but I am a value add in those areas. What that means is a CEO, I can kind of go in and strike for certain projects. I can be involved in certain coding projects and certain content projects. But the thing is my philosophy is this. I never should be a key person or be dependent upon for those projects to be successful. Because quite frankly, at any given moment, I can be pulled away for an entire day to deal with different issues or different types of meetings that you have to have. And as if you think about when you have so many different departments within a company, they all need that attention, right? Everybody in the company needs to you really need to understand what's going on throughout your organization, and specifically as you have rapid growth, because if you don't know what's going on and you can't see some of the issues to help solve, it's gonna really kind of create an unhealthy organization. So what I would just say is I can still do those things, and in fact, I have a project I'm involved in now, and I do some of it at home, but I'm not a key person, which means it can move forward without me, and I think that's important. where I can just provide value. And how do I stay in? Well, how do I stay up to date, that is? Well, a lot of times, Christoph, you invited me to do a webinar on financial technology security. And the cool thing about that is we went in there and I got to get up to date on so many new things that AWS has done that's not even covered in certifications. And it just reignited my passion. I was able to get in there for a week. I was able to go in there and talk about it, help people involved with it. And it really just kind of brought me up again. And it was really, really exciting on that. And then the other side of it is you've invited me to co-host Scale Your Code. And so that's another way I intend on staying on it without being a bottleneck for anybody, just providing that additional value.
Now, I mentioned in the introduction of this episode that we integrated Scale Your Code into Linux Academy and Cloud Assessments. How do you see that integration providing value to new or existing customers and also listeners of the show?
I look at it multifaceted again. If you think about it, what we do is we provide training on technologies and certification. But a lot of times companies use those technologies differently. How they're using it, for example, or how they're implementing it, or in their industry it's used differently. And so what I view Scale Your Code as is your original vision of interviewing those developers, those companies, those CEOs, those founders, those directors of IT, those VPs of engineering, and seeing how they're using that specific technology to solve their problems. I think the big key is how do I use this to solve different problems? In information technology, in cloud computing, the problems aren't the same. The technology is applied differently in so many different use cases. And so interviewing those companies and those engineers and architects using that is going to be super exciting. And I think one of the best ways that we're going to be incorporating that throughout the site is when that happens, we're also going to start providing hands-on labs designed around that specific use case associated with that interview. So for somebody who's really wanting to learn, they can go in and do that specific scenario in a hands-on way and really get that experience. And for any, enterprises or team leads or directors or, IT leadership that is watching, this is a way for maybe you don't need to be cloud certified. However, maybe you should understand how different technologies and even new technologies are being used to solve real world problems in organizations. And so I also view this content as super important for those types of leaders within the information technology realm as well.
Is there anything else you can think of that you'd like to add?
I don't think so. One of the things is Scale Your Code. It's actually free for anybody out there. You can sign up for a Linux Academy Community Edition and get access to that. And quite frankly, if there's anybody or anything that you are interested on being interviewing, I just recommend anybody reaching out to us because, as much as we would love to say we know everything and anything that's going on within the industry, anybody that can say that is not, that it's false, right? So reach out and let's work as a community to really provide some great value for each other.
Now, if people want to stay up to date with what you're working on, or if they have any personal questions for you, how can they reach out?
Absolutely. So I'm on Twitter with the name of Anthony D, as in David James. You can also find me on LinkedIn as Anthony D. James as well. And just add a contact. I'd love to connect with you.
Anthony, thanks again for doing this episode, and thank you for joining the show as a co-host.
Thanks, Christoph, for having me. And I appreciate the invite to co-host Scale Your Code, and I look forward to it.
Everyone, please give Anthony a very warm welcome. We'll definitely be seeing him and hearing him a lot more in the future. Thank you all for tuning in, and see you next time.